Breaking news has ripped through Washington. Newly leaked documents have exposed what could be the most explosive scandal in the history of the Supreme Court. At the center of the storm is Justice Clarence Thomas, accused of accepting lavish gifts, luxury vacations, and even private real estate deals from a circle of billionaire donors with direct political interests. The leaks, published late last night by investigative journalists, allege that Thomas routinely enjoyed perks ranging from Caribbean yacht trips to private jet flights, all while presiding over cases that touched the financial empires of his benefactors. The revelations were staggering. Photographs included in the report showed Thomas smiling on the deck of a luxury yacht, sipping champagne alongside powerful donors. Receipts pointed to flights worth tens of thousands of dollars, all paid for by billionaire friends. One shocking detail described a property transaction in which a wealthy benefactor allegedly purchased Thomas's mother's house only to renovate it at his own expense while allowing her to live there rent-free. The report also claims that Thomas never disclosed these gifts in his mandatory financial filings, raising immediate questions of legality. Ethics watchdogs were swift to respond. "This is not just an oversight," one advocate said on MSNBC. "This looks like a justice of the highest court in the land being bought and paid for." By morning, every major outlet carried the story. CNN ran the headline, "Bribes on the Bench." MSNBC followed with, "Ethics Crisis for Supreme Court." Even Fox News, typically cautious when covering conservative justices, couldn't ignore the gravity of the allegations, calling the leak a serious blow to public trust. On social media, the outrage was volcanic. Hashtags like hashtag bribes on the bench, hashtag bought justice, and hashtag Thomas exposed trended globally. Memes depicted Thomas lounging in luxury while ordinary Americans struggled with rent and healthcare bills. TikTok creators dramatized scenes of billionaires handing Thomas golden gavels, while Twitter threads cataloged the long history of ethical concerns surrounding him. For millions of Americans, the question was unavoidable. If the very people tasked with guarding the Constitution can be swayed by billionaire wallets, what does that mean for justice itself? By sunrise, the Clarence Thomas scandal had devoured the American media landscape. Every major network led with it, their chyrons blazing across screens. Bribes on the bench, ethics crisis at the Supreme Court, justice for sale. Cable news ran wall-to-wall coverage, dissecting every photograph, every receipt, and every unexplained transaction unearthed by the leak. On CNN, anchors asked bluntly, "Can a Supreme Court justice still serve after this level of corruption?" MSNBC's morning panel called it the greatest judicial betrayal of modern times. Constitutional scholars warned that if proven true, Thomas's actions could erode not only his legacy, but the very legitimacy of the court. Meanwhile, Fox News found itself split. Some commentators dismissed the leaks as a partisan smear, while others admitted the evidence was damning. "If even half of this is true, we're in uncharted territory," one conservative analyst conceded on air. The public response was even more ferocious. Hashtags like hashtag bribes on the bench, hashtag Thomas must go, and hashtag corruption crisis dominated Twitter, X. Viral TikToks dramatized the scandal, with creators parodying Thomas being handed golden gavels and luxury vacations in exchange for verdicts. Memes flooded Instagram, images of Supreme Court robes embroidered with dollar signs, gavels shaped like champagne bottles, and captions like "Justice," more like "Just Us" for billionaires' editorial boards piled on. The New York Times ran a blistering column titled "The Court's Credibility on Trial." The Washington Post warned that this scandal may be the tipping point in a long decline of judicial trust. Even international media picked it up. The BBC labeled it an American judicial earthquake, while France's Le Monde compared it to the collapse of a monarchy, saying, "The robe of justice has been stained with gold." Outside the Supreme Court, demonstrators began to gather. Protesters carried signs reading, "Justice for sale" and "Resign, Thomas." The crowd chanted as cameras rolled, their voices broadcast nationwide. Commentators noted the symbolism. The very steps of the Supreme Court, long seen as sacred, had become a stage for public outrage. By midday, it was no longer just a scandal. It was a national crisis. The Supreme Court, an institution meant to rise above politics, was now drowning in it. And at the center stood Clarence Thomas, silent but embattled, as America asked itself whether justice had finally been bought and sold in plain sight. By the afternoon, the outrage had found its loudest and fiercest voice, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Known for her firebrand style and refusal to back down, Crockett stepped before a sea of cameras on the Capitol steps, her tone cutting through the chaos like a blade. She wasted no time with pleasantries. "Let's call this what it is," she declared. "Clarence Thomas is not acting like a justice of the Supreme Court. He's acting like a billionaire's puppet." The crowd gasped, reporters leaning in as Crockett raised her voice. "While Americans struggle to pay rent, Justice Thomas is sipping champagne on yachts, flying on private jets, and hiding real estate deals in his financial closet. He is not serving the people. He is serving his donors. And that is corruption, plain and simple." Her words reverberated across the airwaves. MSNBC replayed the speech on loop, branding it the moment the scandal turned into a movement. CNN framed it as Crockett's challenge to the court itself. Even Fox News, reluctant to amplify the attack, admitted the clip was impossible to ignore. Crockett didn't stop at rhetoric. She demanded action. "We cannot have a Supreme Court that is bought and sold by billionaires. I am calling for a full congressional inquiry, immediate hearings, and yes, if the evidence holds, the resignation of Clarence Thomas. Because justice cannot be bought, and democracy cannot be bribed." Her defiance lit up social media. Hashtags like hashtag Crockett versus Thomas, hashtag bought justice, and hashtag resign Thomas rocketed into trending lists. Viral videos showed Crockett's fiery finger pointed directly at the Supreme Court building, spliced with images of yachts and jets. TikTok creators remixed her speech into an anthem, set to pounding beats, turning her attack into a viral rallying cry for younger voters. Protesters outside the court adopted her language, chanting "puppet of the billionaires," while holding up effigies of Thomas with strings attached to golden hands. Editorials praised Crockett for seizing the moment, casting her as the face of resistance against a corrupt judiciary. In that moment, Clarence Thomas was no longer just under scrutiny, he was under siege. And Jasmine Crockett had made it clear she would not rest until his golden throne on the bench was shattered. By the week's end, the Clarence Thomas scandal had spiraled into a full-blown national crisis. What began as a damning investigative leak had grown into a tidal wave of outrage that shook the very foundations of the Supreme Court. With Jasmine Crockett's fiery denunciations echoing across the country, the question was no longer whether Thomas had accepted gifts. It was whether he could survive in his position at all. On Capitol Hill, Democrats moved swiftly, announcing hearings into judicial corruption and vowing to subpoena Thomas's financial records. Some even floated the unthinkable: impeachment proceedings against a sitting Supreme Court justice. Progressive leaders thundered from the House floor, while moderates cautiously admitted that trust in the court has been shattered. Republicans found themselves trapped in a political vice. A few defended Thomas, calling the scandal overblown, but others, wary of public backlash, quietly urged him to consider resignation for the good of the institution. Meanwhile, the streets outside the Supreme Court had become a theater of anger. Demonstrators camped on the marble steps, their banners reading, "Justice is not for sale," and "Thomas must go." At night, the crowd swelled with chants that reverberated through Washington, "Bought justice is no justice at all." Viral drone footage showed thousands gathered, their cell phone lights illuminating the court in a sea of white, a symbolic spotlight on corruption. Internationally, the scandal dented America's credibility. European allies expressed disbelief that a justice could remain on the bench while drowning in allegations of bribery. African leaders, already critical of U.S. double standards, called it a stain on American democracy. The BBC dubbed it the Golden Gavel Crisis, while Germany's Der Spiegel asked bluntly, "Is the U.S. Supreme Court corrupt to its core?" Opinion polls revealed the damage. Confidence in the court plummeted to historic lows, with 71% of Americans saying they no longer trusted the judiciary to act impartially. Younger voters, energized by Crockett's attacks, flooded TikTok and Instagram with rallying cries demanding reform. As for Clarence Thomas, he remained silent, issuing no denials, no apologies, no explanations. But in Washington, silence was louder than any defense. And as the chants outside the court grew louder each night, one truth was clear. The scandal of bribes on the bench had not just tarnished a justice, it had cracked the marble facade of the Supreme Court itself.